Good evening, and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Gary Sanders, and I'm your guest host this evening. Iowa News and Views is a community affairs program on issues and concerns to you, the Iowa viewer. I want to welcome tonight Senator Paul Wellstone of Minnesota, who's going to be our guest for the next half hour. Senator, welcome.
Thanks for having me on. I like the philosophy of Iowa News and Views. I mean, engaging the public and making sure that we have discussion about public affairs and issues that affect people's lives. Thanks for the work you're doing.
Well, thank you.
Now you're supposed to like me. I started out in a very nice way now.
I'm ready to like you. I was ready to like you years ago, but I was more ready to like you last night, Senator, when before a cheering crowd of 400 Democrats, Johnson County Democrats, you said that you represented the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party and brought the crowd to its feet. Would you go from there?
You have to have a twinkle in your eye, and I remember I said I represented the Democratic Party wing of the Democratic Party, and what I was trying to say, because I think people are sick and tired of all this slash and burn politics, constant attack. What I was trying to say with a twinkle in my eye is that the Democratic Party has been a grand party and at its best when it's focused on economic opportunities for all the people, improving the standard of living for all the people in our country, when the focus has been on the economic justice issues, the workaday majority issues, the kitchen table issues, and I think the Democratic Party has lost its way, and we don't have that same really strong identity on education and living wage jobs and jobs at decent wages, and universal health care coverage and environmental protection, and willing to take on some of the concentrations of power in telecommunications, in banking and industry. We have to become a kind of fighting party for working families and their children in a way that I don't think we've been. So that's what I was trying to say.
What do you think's caused this drift away from, as you mentioned last night, FDR, Truman, Kennedy? What's caused us to drift away from that into a more centrist party?
Well, I think, first of all, the center, with the public is around these economic opportunity issues. That's what people are focused on. How can I earn a decent living, and how can I give my children the care I know they need and deserve? I think that the reason that Democrats nationally, there are exceptions. Senator Tom Harkin is a good exception. He's a strong justice senator. I think the reason the Democratic Party in Washington has really kind of lost its bearing on these issues is not because these aren't winning issues, they are, but I think it has a lot to do with this mix of money and politics that you hear about. I think the compelling need to raise money, the kind of commercial logic, if you will, of the parties, has led to a situation where in many ways both parties are owned and controlled by the same investors. So Gary, the policy performance of the Democratic Party has been weakened by the necessity of raising the big money, in which case people in the country say, we're not so sure that our concerns are of any concern to either one of these parties. That's our challenge.
Right. And if for example, the last election, more than 50% didn't even bother voting, and this has been continuing, why would somebody, after hearing you, a staunch Democrat, say, well, heck, if he's saying that the Democratic Party has lost its way and it's due to big money and both parties are taking big money, why shouldn't we start a third party?
Yeah. Well, that's, of course, an age-old debate that goes back for at least a century. I think third parties have played a really positive role in our country. Sometimes third parties introduce perspectives into the political dialogue that neither of the two parties will do. Joe Rogers at the University of Wisconsin in Madison has, a new party has, for example, really operates on that premise. For my own part, it's a sort of the political scientist in me. We have a system which is a single-member district plurality vote. One person wins in the races. That person who gets the most votes wins. That's a tough environment for third parties. It's not a system of proportional representation. And I think that, to me, what makes the most sense is to dig in. I believe in the Democratic Party. I believe the Democratic Party has done wonderful things for people in the country. So I'm sort of believe that my work should be within the Democratic Party. I think we ought to reform the Democratic Party. I think we ought to make it a party of economic justice issues. We ought to not just have big money TV campaigns. We need to be more connected to people, and that's my commitment. Other people can make a different commitment, but I think we can make the Democratic Party a party that is real important to people in the country.
Mm-hmm. Are you going to be able to be successful in your efforts to do something about campaign finance reform?
Well, I'm worried. I mean, I really love what happened in Maine and Vermont. It's called the clean money, clean election option. They've just basically have gotten almost all of the interested private money out. Mm-hmm. I think that I introduced the bill to do that in Washington. That's not going to happen right away. I'd love to lessen the special interest influence. I'd love for there to be more of a level playing field. I'd love to stop this obscene money chase. I don't think those of us in office or those of us who were challengers should have to spend so much time raising money. The McCain-Feingold bill is a step in the right direction. I support it. Mm-hmm. But
what are its realistic chances?
Well, the McCain-Feingold bill, which is getting very weakened down, and I'm real worried that before it's all over, that what passes won't be what John McCain and Russ Feingold, I've sponsored the bill, really want, but something which doesn't even represent a step forward, but a great leap sideways. I mean, I'd hate for us to pass something that has a great title, but basically keeps all the same money in. I'm very worried about that will happen, but I'm still got a hope for the best.
Well, see, this is what amazes people, okay? That people are so disconnected from major league politics because they see these fat cats going to both parties. And here we had a great idea that was bipartisan in nature, and now it's being watered down, and frankly, as you just said, what it's going to come out is not what we started with. So what realistic hope is there?
Well, listen, there's always realistic hope because we live in the United States of America. I mean, my father was a Jewish immigrant who fled persecution in Russia, and he taught me, look, Paul, you might think things are unfair, but remember, this is an open system. We have the right to speak out and organize, and if the Congress doesn't get the job done, if the Congress doesn't even get 1/4 of the job done, which I think would be a step forward, then I think eventually it will happen because I think people in the country are not going to let Republicans, or for that matter Democrats, get away with not passing reform. I mean, people in the country are just going to have to turn the heat up. This isn't over. This isn't over by any means.
All right. Now, last night, another one at the Johnson County Democratic Fall Barbecue, you also emphasized education as a way to deal with our problems of unemployment and poverty in this country. What are the Democrats realistically proposing on this, and what are the chances with the Republican-dominated Senate and House?
Well, there's two different parts to this. Right now, with a dominated Senate and House, it's really only kind of a lot of what you hope for is stopping the worst as opposed to doing the better. And there can be small victories, but it cannot be anywhere near the kind of education agenda that we should have for the country. And let me talk a little bit about what that is, because for me, this is so important. First of all, I think we got to read. Education's not K through 12. I mean, it's sort of, we shouldn't even talk about it that way anymore. We know it's beyond 12 because there's higher education. It really ought to be pre-K to 85. I mean, education's important throughout our lives. Well, yeah, but the point is many men and women find themselves downsized, and now they're trying to make a shift to another kind of employment, and they need to go back to school in order to get the skills that they need. I mean, many of our students are no longer 18, living in a dorm. They're older. They're back in the community colleges. So that's first point. And then the second point is we now know, on the basis of the neuroscience evidence, on the basis of medical studies. The evidence is irreducible, it's irrefutable that we got to get it right for our children in the very early years. Otherwise, by age 3, many children in our country will never be ready for school or ready for life. We got to make a really strong commitment to good developmental child care. I mean, I see that as a grandpa. I mean, when one of our grandchildren, our 2-year-old, is in our home, every 15 seconds he's interested in something new. There's a small children experiencing all the unnamed magic of the world that's before them. We got to stir that in kids. We can't put cold water on it.
Right, but now the Republicans will say that's the responsibility of the parents. And what is big government doing bothering with that?
Well, look, the argument, and too many Democrats have caved into this. That's why I say I've been in Iowa representing the Democratic Party, wing of the Democratic Party. The argument that when it comes to the most pressing issues of your lives, there's nothing the government can or should do, is a great argument if you own your own large corporation or you're wealthy. not if you're, but not for most of the people. And people know darn well. You've got a couple in Iowa, they're in their mid-30s, they have 2 small children, their combined income is $32,000 a year. Child care can cost up to $6,000 a year. Of course we ought to have some sort of investment here so that it's affordable for families.
Well, I mean, it makes perfect sense, and I'm sure it makes perfect sense to most of our viewers. But then why is it that the party in power, in the House and the Senate, we have 5 members of the U.S. House in Iowa, all Republicans. We have 1 Republican U.S. Senator. Why do these issues make so much sense to you and to, as I said, most of our viewers, but somehow when it comes time to November, they don't vote that way? What's happening here?
I think there are 3 things that are happening. First of all, I think all too often people believe that when it comes to our concerns, the concerns and circumstances of our lives, people in politics are not going to really represent us, in which case you have barely half the people voting in a presidential election, and that hole in the electorate is disproportionately working families, low and moderate income working families. So that's one thing that's happened. I think a second thing that's happened is that, again, the Democratic Party has not been, there are exceptions. Tom Harkin is a good exception, has not been nearly as strong as it could be. Bob Rush is another exception in focusing in on these economic issues. And the third thing that's happened is, and I hate this, and this has nothing to do with either party, it's more important than either party, I think people have become so disengaged and so disaffected toward politics that this is undercutting our democracy. When people say, hey, there's nothing I can do about any of this. I don't want to, I've only got a few hours every day where I can relax, or an hour. I'm not going to spend my time involved in the community on different issues or in politics because nothing good will happen. Then what happens is we have a mini democracy. We don't have the people participating. We almost have to sort of, if you will, we have to kind of almost recapture a democracy in this country. I mean, we really do. We have to sort of rebuild a democracy in our country.
Well, I hate to say this since we're on television, but is it even possible to recapture democracy when both sides use commercials that are so negative and so distorting that the electorate really doesn't even get to learn, what the candidates stand for?
Yeah, of course it's possible. I mean, I'm not a big fan of these capital-intensive, manipulative, slash and burn, hack attack TV ads. I think they turn people off. What we've got are kind of high-tech, low-touch campaigns. And people that are running for office just aren't out in the communities, and that's another reason for low turnout. But I think there's real hope. Minnesota's a good example. We did a really good job. I mean, once a week I just turned and talked to the TV camera and made a substantive argument. A substantive argument about the environment, about jobs, about health care, about education, about reform, as opposed to all this vicious attack, and it was vicious. You know what? People in Minnesota, even people that didn't agree with me on issues, voted for me because they said, look, you have conducted yourself honorably and we're sick of this. So I think people are starting to turn against it. And we were everywhere in the state in terms of being out in the community, and we had this capacity to turn people out. In the last week of our campaign in Minnesota, during the day we were able to make up to about 10 p.m. at night 10,000 get out the vote calls every hour, all made by people in Minnesota. That's a lot of volunteers.
That sure is. But you mentioned the half hour of real issues, and I remember in Perot's campaign in '92 with the flip charts, it seemed to resonate with people that he just had a very simple message that he was doing, and he was speaking to people as if they were intelligent.
That's right.
Now, why can't more people running for office do that?
You just really made an important point. I mean, it should be a given. It shouldn't be like anything earth-shattering for someone to treat people as if they have intelligence. But I think that above and beyond being connected to the concerns and circumstances of people's lives, standard of living issues, speaking to people who are concerned about how to make a decent living and raise their children successfully, really being about supporting families, being, I think, a second, and about reform and getting money out of politics and a more honest political process. You know what else matters? I think if people believe that you believe what you're saying, and that you're treating them with intelligence and that you're telling them the truth, it should be a given. It shouldn't even be startling, but I think it means a lot to people.
Yeah. You're watching, by the way, Iowa News and Views, your half hour around the state of hard news without commercial interruption. All right, Senator
Without commercial
Wellstone.
interruption.
Senator Wellstone from Minnesota is our guest. Last night in Iowa City, he spoke to a cheering throng of 400 people at the Johnson County Democratic Fall Fundraiser. And we're really proud and pleased to have Senator Wellstone on the show. You know, Senator, C-SPAN was here last night and filming it, and that brings to mind that are they possibly doing the Road to the White House 2000 and starting right here with your appearance in Johnson County?
They could possibly be doing that, with the emphasis being on possible. I mean, I love traveling, I love meeting with people, I love speaking out on these issues. I am going to continue to say, look, I'm representing the Democratic Party, wing of the Democratic Party. It's time for the Democratic Party to be strong on these economic justice issues and to be a progressive party, and this is a winning politics. I haven't made a decision yet about whether to run for president. I love doing this anyway, and I will continue to travel and speak, and I've been doing some other travel which is focused on poverty in the country, and I will continue to do that. Whether I run for president or not, it'll be determined in part on the response of people, and also, you know, I got to spend time with my own family, and we got to decide. I was a teacher. I'm not going to have the big dollars. I'd have to do it very differently, and if I do it, it'll have to be very, very grassroots. But I haven't made that decision yet. But it's good for me to be out here, and Iowa is a great place for me to be. I mean, for a lot of obvious reasons. I mean, Iowa will be for me, see, Iowa is a perfect state because, not only because I'm a senator from Minnesota and we're Midwesterners, but also it's still living room politics.
Right.
It's not all this, you got to have zillions of dollars to be on TV. You got, in campaigning in Iowa, you got to be out there touching people and being touched by people. I love that.
Right.
I love that.
No, it certainly showed last night as people repeatedly stood and cheered for you. But, you know, you unabashedly are a liberal, and that's what the Republicans have used to tar the Democrats with very effectively. You know, Reagan, Bush, that was their whole mantra, was that their opponents were liberal. How are you going to counter that?
I just will say, hey, listen, everybody, let them use whatever label they want to. I'm proud of who I am, and you know my record, and you know the issues I'm talking about. But don't let these folks distract you, okay? Let's just sort of keep our eye on the prize, our eye on the ball, and let's talk about what matters. And yeah, it is true that, you know, these folks that are on the attack, I mean, oil companies and pharmaceutical companies and big insurance companies and big tobacco companies, they don't like me much, but they already have great representation in Washington. It's the rest of the people that need it, and that's what I'll keep saying.
Well, you know, also last night you mentioned that you thought possibly the next great civil rights movement in this country was going to be with unions organizing the unorganized.
Yes.
With labor unions at 15% of the workforce, do you think this is something that's realistically possible with our new leaders at the AFL-CIO, or is this a movement that's swelling up from the country, or both, or what do you see as the dynamic here?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that John Sweeney and Rich Trumka's election was terribly important. John Sweeney was president of a wonderful union, SEIU, Service Employees International Union. The majority of the membership were women. Very focused on the economic justice issues, and he's hiring very good organizers, and they are focused on what, interestingly enough, was the, if you will, battle cry of labor in the 30s, which was the need to organize the unorganized. I think it's not only noble, I don't think labor will survive any other way. You just cited the statistic.
Right.
Frankly, if that's what Sweeney's election was all about, if you were going to continue to have the AFL-CIO run by some power brokers, not connected to community people, not out there organizing in the community, not making coalitions with neighborhood organizations and with women and environmentalists and others, labor was not going to go anywhere. But I think there is enormous potential. And since I think the most important issues to people in the country right now are these standard of living issues, I mean, we have this paradox where all the economic statistics looks great. On low levels of unemployment, officially defined, GDP looks great, productivity up, economic growth up. You know what? When that's happening in our country, wage levels are supposed to be going up. They're going down.
Right.
They're going down. So for the missing middle, the vast majority of people in the country, this focus on jobs at decent wages and decent health care and being able to afford child care and having a good family income, that's what matters.
Mm-hmm. Well, in 2000, let's say that you have decided that you're going to make a run for this, and let's just say hypothetically that Al Gore and Dick Gephardt are your two main competitors. Right. How are you three going to avoid a slash and burn in the primary season so that the Democratic Party can come out with a good, strong message against whoever the Republican nominee is?
Yeah. Well, I can't speak for them, although I think they would. I don't believe that that's what they would be interested in. I won't do it.
Okay.
So I can answer that question.
So that's your pledge to the voters
sure.
of Iowa here
but,
now.
But of course, but you know what? It isn't even noble. It's the only way to win.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the only way to win. I mean, there comes a point in time where people are just kind of tired of hearing about what you're against, and they're more interested in hearing what you're for.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it turns people off to the Democratic Party? This is a tough one. That our vice president has the possibility of being indicted on this campaign spending?
I think people are turned off by the whole system, and I think that they don't like what they're hearing or reading, but I also think that some of the people that are most on the attack on the vice president are just sort of interested in destroying him personally, and they're not interested in reform at all, and that's what really makes me angry. Look, should he have made calls in government building? No. Is that the biggest issue, whether he made it from a White House or made it from his office as opposed to walking 100 yards to a private office and making the same calls? I think the real issue is all the ways in which big money has come to dominate the political process. So on the one hand, no, it wasn't the right thing to do. On the other hand, should that be used to destroy him? Absolutely not.
No.
And are there bigger issues? Yes.
Of course, but we've seen time and time again, whether it's the Willie Horton ad,
yeah,
whatever it is,
well, I got news for you and everybody that's listening. I want to tell you, believe me, there are plenty of arrows to sling on all sides.
It's like, how do they get away with the whole message of the welfare queen when, as you have so eloquently said in the past, that the real welfare queens are the people in the boardrooms who are getting these unbelievable subsidies.
Yeah.
How can we get that message out?
Well, we can get that message out by getting that message out.
Okay.
And that's why I've been and I think, frankly, a lot of Democrats, not all, but have too often been either not willing to say that, or they say it but they don't act on it. These are the heavy hitters. These are the well-connected. These are the big givers. Mm-hmm. These are the very folks that all too many people in politics depend upon for election or re-election. But we ought to be taking that on.
You've been in the Senate long enough. Do your colleagues there just think you're out of touch with the realities of modern day, electioneering and campaigning?
No. People, sometimes I go against the grain and am in some pretty fierce debates, but no, I don't think so. There is this kind of code, which is kind of interesting, an insider's code, so right away people might say, uh-oh, we hate this, but I kind of respect it. I think the fact that in our second race in Minnesota, I was so targeted. I mean, there was a national attack machine, he's going to lose. And the fact that I didn't weaver bob and just stayed very clear on issues, and we really ended up winning by a big margin. I don't think anybody thinks that, A, I don't know how to campaign, or B, I'm not a serious politician, or C, I don't know how to win. Mm-hmm. No, I think people take it pretty seriously.
That they think they now realize that that the issues you're talking about are resonating with people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that the voter can see through the smoke
Especially
screen.
in Minnesota, because I had, with all the labeling, a good part of my organizing background was with farmers. So my base was more in rural Minnesota. That's how I came to know Dixon Terry, who was such a great farm activist from Iowa. I did extremely well in blue-collar neighborhoods in the east side of St. Paul. Usually, if you're a liberal from the metro area, although we lived in Northfield in southern Minnesota, but you're not supposed to do well in the Iron Range, the minor. That's my base. So in some ways, I come at this from such a kind of regular person, working class, working family base that we did great, and I'm real proud of that.
Do you consider yourself to be a populist in the grand style of the early 20th century and continuing on through George McGovern, Hubert Humphrey?
Yeah, sure.
And this is how you see, your the next 2.5 years taking this populist message across this state and possibly even New Hampshire, possibly other states?
I think populist, if by what is meant by that.
And I didn't mean to label you.
No,
okay.
no, it's fine. I mean, I think that the history of populism is a sort of a tricky one.
Okay.
And you can get into a demagogic populism, and it can be too much bashing and a little bit too much of politics of hatred. Some of what Pat Buchanan said last presidential election, I think, was important. But then some of what he did, I think, verged on kind of a politics of bashing. So I think you got to be very careful to avoid that. But yeah, I'm a strong progressive, strong populist, and proud of that. Senator from Minnesota.
All right. Well, if you had maybe 30 seconds to just wrap this up here, can you do a 30-second soundbite for the viewers across Iowa here?
Can I do a 30-second sound?
Is that possible?
Sure it is. I've loved to visit. I mean, I've met a lot of people who should be famous, and I'm very committed to public service and honored to be a senator from Minnesota and like being here in Iowa, and I may be back more than once.
Well, I hope you are, because frankly, I think I'm not a totally objective viewer, but I thought your message of economic justice last night truly resonated with the people like I have not heard here in many, many years. And I have the feeling that if you could get out around the state, as this TV show will do, that you're going to do really well here.
If I do run for president, I will be all around the state. That's the only way to do it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Senator Paul Wellstone of Minnesota. Thank you to our viewers and our sponsors and the great crew we have today. We will see you all next time on Iowa News and Views. Thank you so much. Bye now.
Thanks.
Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host of the program. Thanks for joining us. Iowa News and Views is a community affairs program produced in Iowa City and distributed to 12 communities around the state of Iowa to approximately 350,000 households. It's a community affairs program focused on state and local issues of interest to Iowans, and we'd be interested in your ideas for future topics and guests. We'll give you some information at the end of the show on how to contact us. We're going to be talking about the Mississippi River tonight, but before we do, I'd like to tell you about a conference coming up on water quality on November 20th in Des Moines. It's a conference on Iowa's water quality, shaping our future together, and it's sponsored by the Iowa Environmental Council, and it's trying to bring together a year's worth of activities where folks have come together, water quality professionals and citizens, to try and shape a new water quality future for the state of Iowa. And on November 20th, participants will come together and focus on a variety of issues and begin to make some recommendations on how we as a state can act to improve water quality. It's going to be November 20th in Des Moines, and for more information you can contact Susan Heathcote at 515-237-5573. That's 515-237-5573. We encourage you to check that out. The Iowa Environmental Council is doing some great work around the state of Iowa helping us address water quality issues. Topic tonight is the Mississippi River, and you know, Iowa is often referred to as the land between two rivers, and we have the Missouri River on the west and we have the Mississippi River on our east, and that's going to be the focus of tonight's program as our logo helps us describe. The Mississippi River is the nation's largest watershed and drains approximately 1 million square miles, touching 33 states, either in completeness or in part. It is the third largest river in the world, and it's in some significant trouble right now because of some ecological concerns being raised about its health. It's obviously a major amount of commerce happens on the river, a major amount of recreation happens on the river, as well as just its scenic beauty and how we enjoy seeing it and being around it. We're going to be seeing about a 20-minute video tonight that's been put together by the Upper Mississippi River Conservation Committee, which is a group of water quality professionals from a 5-state area, including Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And they have raised a number of questions about how we manage this resource, and we're going to watch that right now. It's very well done, and we think you'll enjoy it. At the end of that video, we'll come back and give you some information on how you can get more involved in Mississippi River issues. So we'll see you in a few minutes.
Everybody knows it's a mighty big river, flows from Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico, drinks the Alleghenies, the mighty Rocky Mountains. Everybody knows how the Mississippi rolls, from northern Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico. And I know that the river has a rhythm, I know, like an Indian drum, and I know that the rhythm of the river, it's the rhythm of life, it's the rhythm of man. The mighty Mississippi is the heartbeat of the land.
Indeed, the river does have a rhythm, the rhythm of a heartbeat, as the Mississippi lies at the heart of America. More than any other natural feature, it is a symbol of our nation and a resource of international significance. And it is one of the few remaining large river floodplains of the world to still maintain any semblance of its original glory. But the mighty Mississippi is in trouble and needs your help. The Mississippi is among the world's greatest ecosystems. Its natural resources provide recreational and economic opportunities for millions of people. Along the upper Mississippi River, there are 156 species of fish and over 40 species of freshwater mussels. It is also a major flyway for migratory birds, helping support up to 40% of North America's ducks, geese, swans, and wading birds. There are over 250,000 acres of national wildlife refuge lands associated with the upper Mississippi River. The wetlands and bottomland forests along its banks provide habitat for over 50 species of mammals like muskrat, beaver, river otter, mink, and deer. Another 45 species of reptiles and amphibians call the river and its banks their home. The bluffs and floodplain of the Great River harbor a number of rare plants and wildlife species, and each of these plants and animals should be guaranteed a place in the future Mississippi River ecosystem. During most of its history, the river was utilized on its own terms, and it was man who adapted to the changing resources which ebbed and peaked in accordance with rhythms brought on by floods and droughts. Native Americans called the Mississippi home, and they used it for commerce and transportation, a food source, and a number of other basic needs.
Everybody knows the springtime on the river, as near to heaven as a boy can be. Then come the floods, ripping like the devil, looking for Hot Tom Sawyer and me. Like Indian Joe, it's as mean as it can be, and I know that the river has a rhythm, I know. Like an Indian drum, and I know that the rhythm of the river, it's a rhythm of life, it's the rhythm of man. The mighty Mississippi is the heartbeat of the land.
In the 1800s, the new Americans began to modify the river to suit their needs rather than adapt to the river's fickle nature. In 1823, the first steamboat ascended the river as far as the site of St. Paul. By the middle of the century, river traffic had reached significant levels, bringing immigrants from all walks of life, and the upper Mississippi region experienced a major population boom. During this time of rapid expansion, resources were plentiful. Settlers believed that our natural resources were without limit and were unconcerned with the long-term consequences. Trees along the riverbanks were cut to fuel the steamboats. Fertile bottomlands were cleared of trees and planted to row crops. Poor soil conservation practices increased erosion in the river's watershed, causing a major increase in sediment contributed to the river. Along with the increased settlement and development in the Mississippi Basin came the pressure to modify the river to capitalize on its resources. For the first time, the river was being reshaped to fit human needs. Early development began with the removal of snags that often sank steamboats. The Swamplands Act between the 1840s and 1870s ceded thousands of acres of bottomland forests and backwaters to the states, ultimately for drainage and agricultural development. In 1878, a 4.5-foot deep navigational channel was authorized by Congress. This development constricted the river by the construction of hundreds of closing dikes and wing dikes. They were designed to confine the river's flow within the navigation channel so there would be sufficient depth during periods of low water. River flow into the backwater habitats decreased significantly, making drainage and clearing easier throughout the floodplain. In 1907, a 6-foot channel project was authorized and hundreds more closing dams were built. The Mississippi River landscape, which had flourished for centuries, was suddenly transformed from a pristine complex of prairies, woodlands, and wetlands to towns, farms, cities, and industrial sites, and the development would continue.
Everybody knows it's summer on the river. Riverboat town, the busy as a bee. Rivertown boys dream about the river. Standing in the pilot house behind the big wheel. They wanna be a pilot and ring the big bell. And I know that the river has a rhythm, I know. Like an Indian drum, and I know that the rhythm of the river. It's the rhythm of life, it's the rhythm of man. The mighty Mississippi is the heartbeat of the land.
The river's hydroelectric potential was harnessed when a dam was built at Keokuk, Iowa in 1913. The dam at Keokuk completely obstructed the Mississippi and created a 65-mile-long impoundment in the river. It drowned the Keokuk Rapids, slowing the river's current and causing sediment to more rapidly accumulate in aquatic habitats. Many mussel beds, fish spawning grounds, and other aquatic habitats were eventually smothered with a blanket of silt. The dam halted the millennia-old migration of fish up and down the river, and species such as the blue sucker, skipjack herring, and ebony shell mussel all began to decline. In 1930, Congress directed the U.S. Army Corps to build and maintain a 9-foot-deep navigation channel. A series of slackwater navigational impoundments were created through the construction of 28 lock and dam complexes between St. Louis and Minneapolis. By 1950, construction of the locks and dams was completed, and the free-flowing river was dramatically changed. The floodplains were isolated by massive levee construction. The taming of the river for navigation and flood control would exact a high price from the river's natural ecosystem. The dams converted bottomland forests and other floodplain habitats into a permanently flooded environment. The amount of aquatic habitat expanded while bottomland forests receded. Some fish and waterfowl numbers temporarily increased, but at the expense of other animal and plant species. The 9-foot channel project's real goal was to increase commercial river transportation, and that it did. Today, approximately 90 million tons of petroleum, grain, coal, chemicals, and other bulk commodities are shipped up and down the Mississippi River each year. The Mississippi River watershed is the largest in North America, including the vast area drained by its tributaries. The Mississippi takes on water from more than 1 million square miles that includes all or parts of 33 states and 2 Canadian provinces. Just imagine this mighty Mississippi River basin. It stretches all the way from the Alleghenies in the east to the Rocky Mountains in the west, north from Canada, and all the way south down to the Gulf of Mexico. The Great River is steeped in history and culture. The great chiefs, Black Hawk, Keokuk, and Pontiac, names like DeSoto, Joliet, and Marquette, LaSalle, Zeb Pike, Thomas Jefferson, Lewis and Clark, Abe Lincoln, and Mark Twain, all playing a role in the river's past. The Mississippi has a place in the Revolutionary War, the Louisiana Purchase, Civil War, the Great American Expansion to the West, poetry, music, and paintings. Imagine the millions of people who traveled up, down, or across this great river, and imagine how the Father of Waters fed them all, sheltered them, transported them, sometimes perilous, but always continuous. Continuous in cleansing and rejuvenating itself through the pulses of seasonal flooding, creating fertile soil, islands and forests, fisheries, and a home to plant and animal wildlife unrivaled throughout the world. However, despite the cultural and ecological significance of this mighty Mississippi, this world-class river ecosystem has become the victim of human intervention for its economic significance. The river's ability to support economic endeavors contributed to America's heartland. But the economic benefits provided by river development have been costly in terms of ecologic currency. Biologists now fear this mighty river is in serious trouble. As early as the 1890s, biologists began documenting noticeable changes: erosion, sedimentation, decreasing fish populations, and water quality. Conservation groups began to emerge. Among them, the Isaac Walton League stepped up and spoke loudly against the waste, the greed, and the excess of unregulated private enterprise. In 1923 and 24, the Ikes waged a successful nationwide campaign to have Congress establish the Upper Mississippi Wildlife and Fish Refuge, which saved nearly 300 miles of wetlands. Businessmen and women began to feel the kindred spirit of adventure and renewal in the great outdoors and realized the need to care for it. And over the past 50 years, concern for the river's environment has steadily increased. Outdoor enthusiasts and biologists have worked to help the river species survive the changes caused by human intervention. Man's exploitation of the river was sacrificing the river's fish, wildlife, and plants. The 1970s brought environmental concerns to the forefront. Water quality improved as new water pollution regulations helped clean up the river, but increased sedimentation, loss of wildlife habitat, and unhindered development continued to alarm those who care about the river. The river's own ability to replace and rejuvenate its complex mosaic of terrestrial and aquatic habitats was greatly diminished by navigation and floodplain development. Backwaters were filling with silt at accelerated rates, but new backwater areas were not being formed to replace them. Many habitats were being lost to erosion, as shown by this time sequence of islands eroding in Pool 8. Realizing the long-term negative effects this would have on the river, concerned groups began to step up efforts to work towards a plan to manage the river and bring it back to health. Help was finally on the way.
Everybody knows that autumn on the river, out on the islands under the trees, lay on your back and look up to heaven. Cathedral ceiling through stained glass leaves, Indian summer on Canadian breeze. And I know that the river has a rhythm, I know, like an Indian drum. And I know that the rhythm of the river, it's a rhythm of life, it's the rhythm of man. The mighty Mississippi is the heartbeat of the land.
One of the groups that has been a leader in the river conservation effort is the Upper Mississippi River Conservation Committee, better known as the UMRCC. Founded in 1943 with a group that consisted of just 22 fisheries biologists, the UMRCC has grown to more than 200 resource managers working in fisheries, recreation, wildlife, water quality, and law enforcement disciplines, and continues to pursue its goal of promoting the preservation and wise utilization of the natural and recreational resources of the Upper Mississippi River. Today, the UMRCC biologists are addressing a wide variety of threats to the river ecosystem, such as exotic species, contaminants, increasing recreational demands on a finite resource, and continued development. Sedimentation has been cited as the #1 threat to the river's resources. A report prepared by the Great River Environmental Action Team in 1980 estimated that as much as 49% of backwater habitats could be lost within 50 years. Sediment reduces water clarity, which reduces the amount of light for aquatic plants to grow and sight-feeding animals to find their prey. But sedimentation is also a natural process that contributes to the river's overall diversity. The real problem is that the river's other natural functions, which counteract the impacts from sedimentation, like periods of flood and drought, have been eliminated. Biologists now recognize that management must adjust to include the restoration or simulation of natural river processes, cycles, and events that over thousands of years helped create the river's diversity of plants and animals. The river ecosystem has significant problems, experiencing an increasing rate of decline in animals and plants that make up the ecosystem. Without a change in how people interact with the river, biologists fear sometime in the future that ecosystem may crash. The mighty Mississippi River is likely to change from one supporting many uses to one dominated by economic uses such as navigation and flood control. The UMRCC believes the future river should not be guided towards either total economic development or a pristine ecosystem, and that really the choice doesn't have to be made between the two. but that it's time for people to strike a balance between economic and ecological demands that doesn't compromise the integrity of either. The problems will not go away, and biologists say they will only grow worse with delay. And if action is not taken to change course, a national treasure could be lost. The loss of a healthy Mississippi River ecosystem will also cause the loss of $1 billion annually in recreation benefits dependent upon that ecosystem. Taxpayers spend close to $90 million per year to subsidize a 9-foot navigation channel, but only a very small fraction of that amount to manage the river's natural resources. But the Mississippi need not be doomed. Citizens up and down this river have the right to get involved in deciding the appropriate balance between short-term economic needs and this river's long-term ecological health. The UMRCC would like you to support continued research toward understanding the ecology of the Upper Mississippi River through efforts such as the Environmental Management Program, promote partnerships between federal, state, local, and private organizations that seek better alternatives to manage the river ecosystem, like Biologists on Board, which puts tow pilots and biologists together, allowing communication and creating mutual respect for their needs and those of the river. And they ask that you support education efforts to help people understand the issues and the value of the river. And most of all, biologists suggest that you let policy and decision makers know that you are concerned about the ecological future of the Mississippi River.
Everybody knows that winter on the river, under northern lights the river will freeze. But way down south the river keeps rolling. Magnolia honeysuckle on a tropical breeze. It's enough to make a Yankee weak in the knees. And I know that the river has a rhythm, I know, like an Indian drum. And I know that the rhythm of the river, it's a rhythm of life, it's the rhythm of man. The mighty Mississippi is the heartbeat of the land. The rhythm of life, it's the rhythm of man. The mighty Mississippi is the heartbeat of the land. I'm gonna go and live by a river until my soul is cleansed. I'm gonna go and live by a river and let life move right in. I'm gonna flow down the mighty Mississippi, watch the eagles climb the breeze. I'm gonna go live by a river until my soul is free. My soul is free. My soul is free. Until my soul is free. Live out there with the trees.
Welcome back. Thanks for joining us. We've been watching a video about the Mississippi River, and we appreciate having that and being able to show it. And I'd like to thank Mark Borkham for getting that tape to us. There's a lot of ways for you to be involved in Mississippi River issues. I'd like to share a couple with you now. There's a couple publications that I subscribe to. One is the Mississippi Monitor, and it's a newsprint periodical that's put out by American Rivers, and it focuses, it's a monthly newsletter, and it supports a variety of writers focusing on Mississippi River issues, on issues of navigation, environmental management program, recreational issues, a lot about what the Corps of Engineers is doing. It's a superb resource, and we'd like to give you some information on how to get a hold of this by sending a message to the American Rivers. There's their address on the screen. or by sending them and letting them know this is a free publication that's available and a very excellent resource on river issues, or send them an email message at American Rivers, and they can send you, get you on that mailing list for this wonderful monthly publication about Mississippi River issues. The other publication that I subscribe to is the Mississippi Times, and that's put out by the Sierra Club Mississippi River Basin Ecological Program, or Ecoregion Program. It's a quarterly newsletter, and it also focuses on the history of the river, stories about the river, folks living up and down the river, and how they interact with the river. And it's also an excellent publication, has a number of really well-written articles in it. And you can get that by sending a message over to the Sierra Club in Madison, and there's their address. They'd love to hear from you, and I believe there's, for a $20 subscription cost, you can get on the mailing list of the Mississippi River Times, and then we'll give you an email address here for Mr. Bill Redding, who can get you signed up on that. Bill is a good guy, and he'll help you out at the Sierra Club Regional Office in Madison. We hope you check out these two publications. They're really well done. If you're interested in river quality issues, they are the couple of publications that'll help you follow things. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. We're a community affairs program focusing on state and local issues. We have an email address ourselves that we'd like to put up on the screen and let you know if you've got some ideas for shows. Feel free to send them our way. We're looking for ideas. We've done a number of shows on the environment, including a show on alternative energy and several on water quality. And we will hope to get over to the Mississippi River here come this spring, next spring, and visit with some folks that are doing some work over in the Quad Cities and up and down the river. We've been glad to be with you tonight. I'd like to thank our crew, our local sponsors around the state that make it possible for this show to be on, and of course you for tuning in. Tell your friends about us. We're Iowa News and Views. Remember, this is just a TV program, and what's really important is what you're doing in your community each and every day to make it a better place to be and a better place to live. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Iowa News and Views.